Rev up your engines. Okay, we got a Lincoln here with a 3.5 V6 to 2015. He bought it used and he's put about 140,000 miles on it. And the reason he bought it was because he had a Ford Focus, but with this, he could do Uber Black and make more money. So for his extra $150 a month payment on a note, he got to make over $1,000 every month extra. So this thing actually made him money. Originally, this thing, if loaded, was about $70,000. He bought it used for $29,000 with like 25,000 miles on it when it was 3 years old. So regardless of what anybody says, the resale value stinks. And he took advantage of it. He drove it another 140,000 miles, used it a lot for Uber, it made him money. And the only real problem he had was the front turbo had to be replaced. But he had that 100,000 mile warranty, so he only had to pay a $100 co-payment. If you didn't have that warranty, let me tell you, you would have paid a small fortune. And you can see how he could use it as an Uber because it's nice leather seats. Back's still in good shape. Now, it does have a joke third row that he doesn't have up. So in case you go to the set of The Wizard of Oz, you could give some of the munchkins in the back seat a ride. That's about all that's gonna fit in there. He said his dogs really don't even fit in there, yeah. Now we look under the hood. The beauty cover's in the back. Stupid thing. You don't need a beauty cover. Actually, if it was my car, I'd leave it off because you want heat to dissipate from the engine when it's hot. That holds the heat in. Now, if you lived in the North Pole, you would leave it on because you'd want to keep the heat on. But most places it gets hot. He's in Georgia. It gets pretty hot in Georgia. I would just leave the stupid thing off myself. See all this plastic stuff? The hotter it gets, the more it will crack as it ages and the plasticizers evaporate away and crack. So I would personally leave it off. But here is the high pressure fuel pump for the GDI. It can put up over 1,000 PSI. There's another pump in the trunk that pumps it to here. 160-something thousand miles. He said it might burn half a quart of oil between oil changes. The engine's still pretty solid. He did a few thousand miles ago change GDI injectors in it. He didn't go to Ford. They went at $274 per injector. He got Bosch ones online. Bosch is an excellent company. As a matter of fact, Bosch is the company that makes that fuel pump that's sitting on there anyways, right? And he paid $100 a piece and he did it himself. In the case of this engine, this is not like an Audi or a BMW, where some of them can take 8-10 hours to access the injectors and replace them. He did it himself. It's not that bad here. Didn't cost him that much money. This particular 3.5 liter engine is not that hard to work on. As the owner says, he's good at swapping parts. So he's getting a little bit of hesitation at different times, and he says he hears a little clacking noise first thing in a startup that goes away. Everyone who knows these engines knows that problem with the cam phasers on these things, okay? They have variable valve timing, right? And the cam phasers have problems. Now, back in the day, camshafts were solid pieces of steel. They spun. They could run forever. 40,000 miles, my Celica still has the original cams and it runs like a clock. Does not have variable valve timing. The Matrix, it's a Toyota, they don't break much, and it's only got 100,000 miles. Ford are just notorious for having cam phaser problems in the variable valve timing. And they're notorious for having problems like that. I won't bore you with the details, as I did it earlier. And people complain, oh, we're tired of looking at that data, so I'll explain the data to you. So that machine allows you to do unloaded and loaded tests. And like anything, something may work fine just sitting there. But then when you put a load on it, like you go up a hill full speed or you're towing a heavy load, different things can go wrong. So with that machine, the variable valve timing went to minus 39 degrees, which is well too far advanced. It turned red on the machine. The data's black and red. It showed that that side isn't working right. Variable valve time is starting to go out, which is typical on these things. And that's one reason he gets a noise when he starts it up first thing in the morning. Here's a clacker, clacker, clacker. That's the variable valve timing making a noise. Now, I took it for a road test. This thing runs fine, shifts fine, gets the same pretty much gas mileage that he got, maybe a couple miles a gallon less. Now that it's got 160-something thousand miles on it. But when you put it under a load, it just was advancing it too far, which is going to make it run weird. Back in the day, the fuel pump, this would have been an ignition distributor sent spark. You turn it to advance it. It'd make the car run faster and accelerate. That's why what we have today is variable valve timing. Instead of advancing the ignition, which it actually does that to the computers, but today they can also advance the cam timing to give you even more pickup. But if you remember the old cars, if you turn the distributor too far when you accelerate, the engine go clacka, 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 because it was so far advanced, it was firing before the valves had a chance to close. It was hammering them in here, clack, clack, which is a very bad thing. Now, this car doesn't do that. It only makes a little clicking when he starts it. Now, there are what are called cam phaser lockout kits. You can pay a mechanic, take the front of the engine apart, and they can put in a lockout. So instead of having variable valve timing, you'll have it just like it was a solid cam and it doesn't move around, and you'll lose maybe 1 or 2 miles a gallon gas mileage. But I've seen people do that and go hundreds of thousands of miles more. Only thing you got to worry about in this is the fact it's got like 169,000 miles on it. So everything is probably worn. And if you have to change the timing chains, well, then you have to change the guides. And of course, the piston rings are still worn. It's really not worth half-assed rebuilding an engine. You either do the whole thing or you get another car. In the case of these EcoBoost engines, from my experience, change the oil every 5,000 miles. Use a good filter. Take care of them. Don't overheat them. Flush the cooling system every 4 or 5 years. They might last quite some time. When they do actually physically wear out inside, get rid of them. Get something else. I mean, he got rid of a Ford Fusion and got this, you know? It's time when it's smarter to get rid of them because, truth be told, very few people know how to rebuild these engines correctly. They are so complex. And on top of that, even if a guy knows, let's say everything's worn, if he has to buy pistons, crankshaft, camshafts, blah, 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 $15,000, you know, nobody's going to spend that kind of money rebuilding an engine on an old car, yeah? Most guys, if it blew, would say, oh, I'll go to a junkyard, we'll try a used one. If it's okay, we'll either drive it or we'll sell it and get rid of the thing. So, in this case, if you put the lockouts in it, the noise goes away and the cam doesn't have any more waffling and advancing too far, it could run perfectly fine for years to come. I wouldn't personally attempt to rebuild these things. They aren't very rebuildable engines in the long run. I have seen people rebuild them like a 1 or 2 year warranty, right? Well, let's say the original one went 180,000 miles, right? Unless you're driving 180,000 miles in a year or two, the warranty's meaningless. And usually their mileage is real low. They'll give you an engine warranty maybe 20, 30,000 miles. So that's why they don't rebuild them right, because you can get away with using the old cams, using the old crank. Your warranty's only 30,000 miles. If you wanted to do it right, it's more money than it's worth. And this thing still runs perfectly fine. It doesn't have any problems running. Just a little hesitation, a little clanking on startup, and in this case, it is the cam phaser. It still rides like a dream, even though there's still the original shock. He's getting his money's worth. 29 grand. He made money as an Uber driver. Then it's still running at 169,000. He did get the turbo fixed before he had 100,000 miles. He was lucky there. What if it was 102,000 miles when it went out? He would have been the one ponying out a lot of money, not just a $100 co-payment. That's why I warn people about buying used EcoBoosts. Now, he bought it with 20-something thousand miles, so they don't wear out that fast. He didn't have any worries. But let's say you were looking at a vehicle like this used, you'd want a guy like me to test it out, to drive it around and say, like in this case, the test I did, I would say, tell the guy it needs, this is what it costs to replace the whole cam variable valve timing system, or you can do a lockout for this kind of money and get worse gas mileage, and see how low he could sell the car for. Granted, the seller would probably just say, go away, and he'd find somebody who didn't know a guy like me that would put a regular scan tool, and none of this data comes up because there were no trouble codes at all. Trouble codes won't go unless they're really bad, and they would just say, oh yeah, it runs good, go ahead and buy it. You need somebody to check out an EcoBoost engine with a fine-tooth comb with a machine like my Autel's, because within half an hour we mechanics can see, do we see any red data? If we see any red data, we analyze it, and if it's something big, we tell them don't buy it. The cams are wearing out. Right? If somebody was going to buy this vehicle, I'd say basically, unless you want to buy a worn engine, I wouldn't particularly buy this car, right? But it's still running good for him. He's made money on it. He can still drive it around, and if he wants to stop the little noise in the morning and a little hesitation, I'd say put a cam lockout in it. They're not all that expensive. And of course, they're not going to be making these things anymore. Even the owner wondered. He said, it's been a great car for me. He bought it for $29 when it was 3 years old with 25,000 miles on it. They don't hold their value. For some reason, people just didn't like these things, even though they run good, they ride like a dream, but people felt it wasn't enough for the money that they cost new. But he was real happy for 29 grand. Now, the only thing I found when I scanned it were all these wacky communication codes for not communicating with anti-crash module, speed sensors, blah, blah, blah. So, as you can see, this has a brand new battery. It's been replaced recently. So, all of those codes, which I erased, could have been because the battery wasn't reset. So, call cranking 750, 750, so we'll turn it up to 750 and we'll see what the magic machine says. Testing. State of charge 100%, state of health 97%, so that's really good. Okay, it was put on at AutoZone, and they don't have the equipment that I have to reset it. They probably didn't reset it anyways, but when you have a car this complex, you can't get a $50 scan tool and put erase codes. It only erases the OBD2 codes. These are communication codes. They're U codes. They'll say U blah 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 blah. I mean, they're communication codes. When the battery gets below a certain parameter, it'll trip a bunch of codes, right? You replace the battery, it does not on-trip those codes. You have to have a machine like my Autel to reset it, and I've reset it, and I can just about guarantee it. It had like 28 codes. I'll bet you none of them come back. If one or two does, big deal. But it had all those codes, because when the battery gets below a certain parameter voltage, the sensors don't get the right voltage, so they get either lack of communication or low voltage codes. If a fancy guy puts a machine on, you get all these no communication codes. First thing, make sure you got a good battery. Test it like this. Say, hey, when was the battery changed? If they said last week, last month, or even 6 months ago, those old codes will not go away if they were communication codes. Gotta have a guy like me reset them. In this case, we did. You probably won't have any problems at all. The battery is right, but he did say the terminals were loose. He had to retighten them. So at AutoZone, they didn't tighten them tight enough, and he didn't trust them testing it. Well, at least they tested it right, because it is fine. But that's probably what made it have those 28 codes. They were all communication codes. Low voltage will do it. Don't freak out if you get communication codes. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.